Welcome everyone back for another episode of Fencer Spotlight. This will be episode 4. I have with us Charles Turner, a friend, fellow fencer, fellow instructor, really nice guy, and I think puts his heart and soul into the sport in and out of the ring. So Charles, kick us off, man. Tell us a little bit, just a quick summary about yourself. Where do you teach?
So I'm in Tyler, Texas, East Texas area. It's called East Texas Historical Fencing,
Yep.
and I've been involved with them for almost 10 years now, since 2015, and I've been an instructor for the last 4 or 5 years.
Very cool. Very cool. What weapons do you teach and study?
So our first weapon was longsword. We're an Italian longsword school, and we did a little bit of side sword at the beginning there, and then our side sword guy moved away, and Michael and I kind of pivoted into a longsword and rapier hybrid, and now Michael and I both prefer. Michael's my co-instructor, by the way. Michael and I both prefer the rapier, but in the area, longsword pays the bills, as most people understand with a HEMA school.
Sure. Before we get too deep in our interview, I thought it might be a good idea. Let's plug some tournaments coming up outside of the tournament of defense, man. Let's get that unity going and spread the word. You have anything coming up on your end or a tournament you're
On
looking
my
forward to
end,
going to?
no, but locally, I think you're running Texcalibur this weekend.
We're in the
Um,
rapier portion,
The
so
rapier, excuse me. Yeah,
please
no, the
don't.
whole thing. If you any complaints, ask him. No.
Yeah, yeah. No
Uh
administrative questions, please.
Donnybrooks coming up in the middle of August here pretty soon, and then we've got Gazelle Infection in Oklahoma City at the end of October.
Very cool. Yeah, I know we're going up there for at least one of those. Castellan infectant, I think for sure. I know some of my guys are going. I'm gonna try to go too if I get back from Italy in time. And
Awesome, man.
Donnybrook certainly would like to go to. I've heard good things about the tournament.
Yeah, it's a well-run tournament. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. So what treatises, man? Do you guys study like a certain treatise or you have a pedagogy that you guys kind of put as the overriding mantra for the school?
Yeah, so we pull mostly from Gigante's book 1 and 2, and that's what Michael likes. And as I began to kind of take over the rapier scene within the school, I still pull from Gigante and a little bit of Fabrice there, but I'm really liking the late period stuff. Like one of my favorites is Rodriguez del Canto, and I really enjoy Senese and Marcelli as well. I like all three of those because they've kind of calling it Italian rapier isn't technically untrue, but I really like to refer to it as Mediterranean because it has a lot of Spanish influences in it as well, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, man. How long have you been studying the Mediterranean fencing, if you will?
Man, I think I really got into it. So once I really started talking with Levi basically every day, so about 3 years ago, and he turned me on to Sinise and or Sinese or Sinise if you're 10 years ago, and Marcelli about 3 years ago, and I started reading through Alfieri, which is another late period source, and I found that I really enjoyed the way that they explained things, the way that they did things, especially since Marcelli is kind of the lineage of Fabris, and it's like late period Fabris, and I find that to be more applicable for the way I like to fence and how I like to compete.
Gotcha. What would you say is the biggest call out in that treatise?
Overriding theme is a lot of, I mean, Marcelli straight up says that the best possible hit is a hit in time, right? And we teach you everything else because stuff happens. But I find that the theme of a hit in time, controlling the three levers of space, time, and blade tends to be, I think that masterful fencing is, hits in single time with a gathered sword. And I think that the rapier specifically encapsulates that concept the best of any of the historical swords. And I think that Mercelli specifically within rapier encapsulates what it means to hit in single time in rapier, which is why I prefer it so much. I think that's the big standout for me.
Yeah, let's switch gears for a minute, man. You've been launching a really cool crusade, I would say, online and spreading the good word about the Musketeer blades, the
Oh,
triangle
absolutely.
blade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan since first held one a couple years ago through HF Armory. And, I mean, maybe give these guys a snapshot on why this is something that it's pretty passionate to you or something that speaks to you, and I'm happy to fill in some holes there too.
Okay, sure. I mean, I can go at this from a lot of angles. The first time I ever saw one being used on a rapier that wasn't like an old SCA guy was Maestro Tonpoy from Spain. He uses a 38 inch on his rapier, and he does a lot of late period and early period destreza, and he switches back and forth between kind of a side sortie rapier and the musketeer blade, depending on what time period or what he likes to do. But what's important to him is that now that Ton is getting older, he finds that the lighter sword and maybe not even just lighter, but the way that the sword is designed really helps them extend that training period because it's kind of like if you play the guitar, there's a point where you can't practice for very long because you don't have any calluses on your fingers, and as you build those calluses, you can begin to practice for longer and longer and longer. But if those calluses go away, you kind of have to start over. And I find that I can use a heavy sword, in the 1,500 gram range, but I can't use it for very long. And so I find that it's really important for me to be able to train as long as I can without injury. And the musketeer blade has been that missing link for me.
Yeah.
I found a lot of pushback with people. They like to call it, oh, it's just an epee blade, which isn't, it's easy. It's easy to just kind of cop out and be like, oh, it's just an epee blade because they're not really willing to face reality and hold one in their hands or handle an original. And if they have handled an original, they like to be choosy about the ones. I remember a very specific interaction at Texas Sword Retreat a few years ago when Arms and Armor brought out some original rapiers, and they had two. They had an early period and a late period, and they had one that was very much in the style of Fabrice with the 7 or 8 rings on either side and a big, thick blade, big, thick, almost half-inch thick ricasso. And then they had a later period sword from like the 1660s. And I could see the people crowding around each one, and people like, "Oh, now this is a rapier," and then the other people, "Oh, no, now this is a rapier." But they were both rapiers, and they're just from different times. And one felt very heavy and very point forward, and one felt kind of light and nimble. And but they were both rapiers, and they would have existed at the same time. And I find that being super dogmatic about both of those, especially when they existed at the same time, is this unnecessarily tribalistic. It's
Yeah.
they just want to stand for something, but it's like an odd hill to die on.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that the HF is special in the sense that it's the only plus 38-inch musketeer blade that I know about because they're 42 and a half inches long, right at 104 centimeters and or 103 and a quarter or so about but because most people they think of musketeer blades, they think of small swords with the 36 or the 28 inch or the at the most 38 inches long that you can get from Zen Warrior. And I would like as many people to hold the 42-inch one as I could, because I think that if they could just get their hands on it in a good configuration, they might change their minds.
Yeah. And I'll even supplement just a little bit. I think you covered on every box. Uh, First off, our mutual friend of ours, one of my fencers, Alexander Koch, really nice guy. He owns a actual extant 1630s Pappenheimer, and when I picked it up and we weighed it, it was like 3.25 pounds, but it feels like a foil. I mean, the balance on it is absolutely incredible. Now, if I go pick up a modern day manufacturer's 3.25 pound rapier that looks exactly like that Pappenheimer, it's a crowbar. I mean, it's something
Absolutely.
that's going to
Yeah.
dislocate my shoulder if I try to cut with it. Um, it has no balance to it. Yeah, maybe the point forward, sure, it's got that covered. But if I just pull it slightly offline, just even a little bit, it becomes this really encumbering item that I would never want to use. But Alex's Pappenheimer, on the other hand, feels like my HF. It's got presence, blade presence, and at the same time, highly agile. So that was a big game changer for me, which then encouraged me to go seek out other options outside of what we see as the quintessential rapier, if you will, to go find some other options. And when I came across the HF Armory, and they're not sponsoring my interview with you at all. I'm just saying it's the best deal in town. First off, price wise, legit. The organization will get you your sword within 2 to 4 weeks from the Ukraine, and they're based in Kiev, right? Awesome customer service, and the product lasts. The blades are,
100%.
I would say, a little. I would say they're less durable than some of the crowbars that we speak of, but the fact that the price point for a sword is $150 or whatever it is, and then you just go buy a replacement blade for $75,
70 bucks. Yeah.
you're set for the year. You go buy four swords, and you're going to be, and your fencing immediately improves, but your joints will thank you as well.
100%. Actually, I had an interaction with them just the other day. So for people who don't know, the warehouse where they keep a lot of their stuff kind of switched sides within the war a little bit there, like the lines passed back and forth across, and they were unsure if they were going to be able to ship out some of their orders. And I got a message from them. They're like, "No, we're absolutely going to continue to ship our stuff out, and like they'll have nothing to worry." So they're literally, like pretty close to where the stuff's happening, and they're still shipping stuff out. That's some crazy customer service.
Dude, crazy.
Um, I
Crazy.
find, and I've spoken to a lot of the American manufacturers, not just Americans, some of the Europeans as well. And when you really get them talking about what they think a good sword is, you find very quickly that their number one criteria is,
Look.
will they ever return this?
Yeah.
Will someone ever return this? And why would they return it? Because you find like cold steel's a great like scapegoat here. Why is every cold steel twice as heavy as it needs to be? Because they want it to be indestructible. That's just how it is. They know that random people are going to buy them on Amazon and go try and chop a tree down, and they don't want to return it. And they have that lifetime warranty because they know you're not going to break it. And I find that business model is really attractive when you're kind of, a lot of HEMA manufacturers are existing on razor thin margins anyway. I don't think anybody's
Yeah.
like getting rich off of this. And so if you're in a constant state of having to return blades all the time, then I feel that's a bad business model. So I can understand why people are super interested in having a sword that's not going to break. I find that to be kind of specific in HEMA though. I know that in Olympic fencing, you're a weirdo if you don't show up to a tournament with at least three or four spares
Oh,
because
big
you're
time.
probably going to break one. You might even break one in warming up and you're just ready to change them out. But they're happy. And I understand that we're getting a little bit elitist in regards to, oh, you expect everyone to have five or six blades? Yeah, kind of. I kind of do. I do. That's the name of the game. And I really don't like that we've sacrificed how it feels and usability for durability above all other things. Because I'm happy to have a sword, maybe not a sword that breaks in an unsafe way, but a sword that is less durable, but feels more correct than extremely durable and then just feels like I'm waving a wrench around in the air.
Well, yeah, your joints will thank you for it. They're
100%. Yeah.
they're
And
healthy,
that's more
right?
important to me. Like knee surgery, shoulder surgery, and wrist surgery are infinitely more expensive than buying one or two blades a year.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? Come on, we're in HEMA. If you don't love gear, I don't want to judge anyone else, but at the same time, you might be in the wrong sport. I mean, we're always
Absolutely.
looking
Yeah.
for better gear. I mean, heck, it's like it's one of the passions is like, hey, better jacket, better pants, better shoes, whatever
100%. I
comes.
mean, I've got students with rapier who, they buy a stock sword and they're like, there's something off about this. And then they come back and are like, man, if I could just take a few grams out of this pommel, because I know rapier nerds are this way, where it's like, man, if I could just extend the point of balance like an inch, that would just be awesome. And it's super specific stuff like that. And that's how rapier is.
Oh,
But I
dude,
find
I
like,
gotta I have a nuanced story like that. So, when Francesco Loto was here in my house last time, I was like, "Hey, you can borrow this rapier." It was an HF, right? And then he sat there for like 45 minutes going through all my pommels to find the perfect pommel to get the perfect balance on his sword. And then like he's like, "Oh, hey, we can do this too, and we can lessen the vibrations." I mean, the guy like tweaked out his rapier, but I will admit, once it was done, I was like, this feels pretty good. Feels
yeah, I mean,
pretty
I had
good.
a guy straight up 3D print me an entire guard and a pommel to get to get exactly what I wanted. I mean, I want what I want, right?
Yeah.
And
I
like the
will
training
pull
tool I want is training tool I want.
I will plug HF one more time. And that is if you're looking for a durable sword that still feels like an extant rapier, you can just go one up and get the club rapier. And these swords are beasts. They will last forever. They're only slightly more encumbering than the musketeer blade, and they handle really well. I actually prefer that sword when I'm fighting rapier dagger than I do the musketeer blade because it does have a slight bit more presence when I'm blasting through in like a single tempo action. Pretty
I
cool.
agree. I agree with
Yeah.
that. I find, and this is a bigger problem in the longsword scene. I find when people start, because there's nothing, it's not that swords don't have a presence or that they don't have, a superior or inferior point of balance or that the flex doesn't make a difference at all. But I find people like, hey, I don't like using Siggy Forge fetters because they're too flexible. And I go, well, what do you mean? And they go, well, when I'm in the bind, it gets pushed out of the way. And then I think, oh, it sounds like you're binding with the flat of your blade because no blade flexes on the edge. That's not how blades work.
Yeah.
And if you're getting flopped out of the way in the bind, I find that hey, maybe your bind mechanics aren't very good. But how do you tell somebody who's been fencing for 12 years and like, hey man, maybe you're maybe you've been doing it wrong this whole time. And I find that with the preference, especially with a lot of like at the beginning, because rapier is just now starting to get kind of really popular in the United States. And I find that at the beginning, a lot of people were SCA crossovers and a lot of big swords came with them. And they're like, man, feel the bind presence on this thing, feel the presence. And it's flat or strong or weak or strong. It doesn't matter where you bind. It's going to push you out of the way because it weighs 4 pounds. And it's one of those like, hey, have you considered, I don't know, maybe like learning a couple of body mechanics and I can pair you out of the way with a foil with the right mechanics, right?
Yeah.
Something a local guy, Russ Mitchell, likes to do is he gets out this big log and you get your little dinky saber and you start swinging it at you. He's like, parry this. And you're like, oh my God, that's a log. But if you parry right and on your strong, then you parry it because you're on the strong of the blade. You're catching it on the guard like you're supposed to. And it doesn't matter how big the thing he's swinging at you is if it's done with good structure, good bone structure, body mechanics. But that's the point. That takes work, that takes effort. And I find a lot of the complaints about the musketeer blade specifically are people outing themselves as not putting the work in or not wanting to put the work in.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you want to fence at a high level, you have to put the work in. You have to put the work in physically, mentally, tactically,
It's
at all levels
non-negotiable.
and form. Yeah, for sure. It just is. If you're going to want to reach that top tier, you're going to just have to put the work at all levels in. So
And
that brings me to my next question, man. You talked about some, like you gave kind of the stereotypical guy that's 12 years in and somewhat has a hard head, if you will, to potential new information. And that comes to the tournament of defense. You know, you've come several years, you've done very well every year in the tournament of defense. You know, overall, what's been your experience just at the competition and seeing the maturity of the event?
I find, so I've come for this year will be my fourth year. I've been 3 years. I find in regards to so as a rapier guy, I have a hard time finding an event that cares about rapier as
Yeah,
much as me.
yeah,
Because I remember before I started organizing part of Gazelle Infect and before I got involved with the Free Fencing Federation and writing the rules for them, they did rapier the same day as longsword, right before longsword, and so it was mostly a bunch of people who were just waiting to do longsword, and they brought their school's custom or not custom, sorry, they brought their school's loner economy Castile, and they competed, and they did what they wanted. They just didn't want to sit around, and I get it, but that's kind of how rapier's been treated for kind of ever really, and only with a few exceptions on the West Coast where the SCA is really big over there and HEMA rapier is really big over there that people really find rapier as just kind of like the thing that I also do. Like I do longsword, but I also have a rapier, or I do sword and buckler, but I also own this rapier. And there's not a lot of rapier primaries. And I find that tournament of defense was the only and still the only tournament I've ever been to that cares enough about rapier to maybe suggest that there are some nuances about the sword that require more considerations in the rules than say longsword, because I like a lot of longsword rule sets, but I find that people get lazy and just apply the longsword rule set to rapier with maybe like, oh, but you can't cut the body, or now we have prior or something. They don't really like put a lot of effort into it, and it's very clear that someone who doesn't do rapier wrote the rules, and I really appreciate that tournament of defense is run by rapier people. It is a rapier tournament for rapier people.
yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. And that brings us to our rule set. You know, one of the reasons I was so excited about interviewing you is you know, last year was our first year to really roll out the international technical rule set. we had done a pilot, but that's just a pilot, right?
Yeah.
But you competed really well in that event last year in single rapier. But we had there was a lot of with it being the first full year, there's just a lot of disruption that goes on because the rule set is nonstop fighting,
Yeah.
not point fighting. And nothing wrong with point fighting. There's always going to be point fighting, but as a tournament, we kind of just went all in because we were like, look, this seems pretty action packed, and it's got a different look on something, but at the same time, it's still kind of the same thing. What was your overall experience competing in that rule set for the first time? And then maybe what's your take on it now?
So the very first time I competed in it was during the pilot, and I competed in the rapier and offhand tournament.
Yeah,
And I think a couple things went wrong. I think the first thing that went wrong is that most of the continuous rule set tournaments in the United States are hit the guy as many times as you can to rack up as many points as you can. And that kind of seems like at face value what any continuous rule set would be without any explanation. I'm not sure it was explained as well as it could have been, to the point that I remember watching a fight between two individuals, and one of them was
yeah,
wearing this exterior chest protector, and Francesco was judging, and he separates them. He literally puts his hands in between them and separates them, and he grabs one guy by the chest protector, and he looks at him and he goes, and he's pointing. He's like, "You must defend. You have to defend yourself." And I
yeah,
was thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is." Well, I was like, "This is." They explained the rules like, "Uh-oh, people are just going to just beat the mess out of each other until the 3 minutes
yeah.
is up, and they're going to get tired." And that's exactly what happened. And I find that the second year, there was a lot more explanation. It was clear who read and who didn't read, and who listened and who didn't listen, because
Yeah.
it was some people who clearly understood what was expected of them within the rules, and they did, mid to fine. And the people who didn't seem to understand what was expected of them went in with that caveman brain of, I'm just going to hit this guy as much as I possibly can because there's no way I can lose, right? Uh, and they misunderstood what it was that what was after, and they just got tired and were unable to compete, and were unable to continue, or they got tired quick enough that their opponent picked up on them and was able to beat them in the end anyway. I found the initial response I had was I was a little bit confused by a few things,
Yep.
because every time I fought a new round I seemed to learn a new criteria on what I was being judged on. And honestly, it wasn't until I attended one of the judging seminars that you put on, and I was able to speak with Francesco at length, that I really think that I understand how the rules are meant to be interpreted now, or rather how they're meant to be implemented. And I'm confident that with sufficient judging, and you've run enough judging seminars and certified enough people, that I think that this year it will. I don't want to say it's going to be seamless and perfect,
It
but I
won't.
think that it'll be a net positive for any of the competitors that are
Yeah.
competing.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people were confused about what was expected of them. Um, and reading back through the rules, now that I understand what it said, the rules do tell you everything. I think that people kind of like you have selective hearing or selective reading, or rather in, like biblical archaeology, there's a concept called eisegetical thinking or eisegesis, where you insert a thought into the text, and then you allow the text to
yeah.
believe it. Because if you want to find something in a textbook to prove your point, you'll find it, right? If you really want to. And I think that people had a lot of preconditions, or rather presuppositions, about what was expected of them, and they either found those things in the rules or they chose to ignore other things.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think I think this year should go pretty well.
I think so too. I definitely think that certifying judges and just getting people keenly aware of, how the game is played is important. I mean, heck, if you go to a rugby match, and I've gone to many of them, on day one of watching the rugby match, you're going to be somewhat at a loss.
Yeah.
Or go to a modern fencing tournament if you've never attended one and go watch men's saber or women's saber or foil. You're not going to know what the hell is going on. You're going to be like,
Yeah.
what? That person got the touch? So I look at it, and I knew this going in. I knew there would be some disruption. I knew there would be some hurt egos. It's just whenever you do something new in life, it's going to happen. It just, people hate change for the most part. But at the same time, there'll be a group or a body of people that see it as possibly benefit or just something different to do within the community. And that was really just the motivation to do it that way. Have you tried the rule set outside of when you came to the seminar, and or what benefits do you feel that you've gained when you fence within that environment that might be different than point fencing?
So I've run a couple of rounds with it at home with some people I know are going to join me at the tournament. I find that the cardio aspect is usually the big looming one because you can be. There's a quote from Lord of the Rings where he said, "We dwarves are natural sprinters, very dangerous over short distances," and it's like I can really put the gas on for about 5 rounds if I need to, but that same gas does not last me 30 minutes. It just does not, and I that was more apparent to me during Francesco's presentation when he was talking specifically about like heart rate and how to train for this and what kind of zone twos and zone fours you need to be taking into account. And it's not that I didn't already know that, but it was one of those like, I mean, the organizer of the rule set of the event here is suggesting that you need to be doing 45 minutes of zone two cardio a day minimum in order to be kind of competitive at this event because the guys who are winning are obviously training much more than that at a much higher standard, but like in order to not gas yourself out and do well enough to maybe make elims, here are the minimum requirements that you need. And I find that especially within an amateur sport and an amateur sport mostly populated by people who don't seem to have done much else, that seems gatekeepy or perhaps super just regular unpopular because they're like, I don't like there being some sort of objective fitness requirement for me to maybe do well. And I find that in a lot of tournaments that are only 3 or 5 touches or single touch, that it's easy to be like super duper duper out of shape and kind of luck your way into a gold medal match.
Yeah,
But when you add that like cardio aspect to it, I find that it really separates the willing from the unwilling.
right. Yeah, yeah.
But so that was the big one for me. And then in regards to like how it changed my fencing, so I've gotten a few comments from some strangers where they're like, "Hey man, you hit me. Why did you hit me again? Or why did you knock my sword out of the way after you hit me and then hit me again?" I was like, "Look, man, I'm not sure that you acknowledged that touch because you were kind of still standing there. But you know what it really comes down to is I've become so hyper focused on like not getting hit ever because Gazellen has a 2 tempo afterblow, which we got a lot of pushback for, but it's for the same thing. It's
Hmm.
hit, defend, hit again, and they're like, you get a yellow card for double tapping. I'll eat that yellow card to be honest with you.
Right.
Because like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not just going to stand there and just let them get me. Oh, it's out of tempo. I don't care. I'm not going to let them hit me. I don't care that it's out of tempo. I'm not going to stand here and eat a 5 tempo late afterblow. I'm going to parry. And what did Marcelli say? The best hit is a hit in time. So I'm going to parry riposte at the same time, and you're going to eat a stop thrust on your way in to hit me with that afterblow. Sorry about your luck, dude. But that's really what it's changed the most about my fencing. I found that I have my tendency to I used to pose a lot, like after I hit, or I'd lunge a lot deeper because I can, and they're just harder for me to recover, especially with all my knee injuries. And I find that my fencing has gotten far less extended. And I focused a lot more on making sure that I'm absolutely sure that I'm going to hit this hit clean, and then maybe possibly able to hit them 2 or 3 times after if necessary. All of my actions I've sorted into, if I do this action, can I recover into another action immediately? Is that possible? If it's not possible, then I just don't do it. Even if I could pick up a point at another tournament with it, I found that those have been the biggest changes for me.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely summing up some of Marcelli's hey, be regulated when you approach type
Absolutely. Well,
methodology.
and I find that just training for this tournament, just in general, because I've had to be doing all this cardio. I've had to be like fencing more to make sure that I'm like controlling my breathing. All of those things inside or outside of the tournament have just made me better at fencing in general, or just made me like just in better health now because I want to do well at this tournament because my number one motivation is don't embarrass yourself in front of other people. So, so so to that end, it's like I don't want to look, don't look stupid, don't look stupid, don't we just going in my head the whole time. And so to that end, I find that training for this tournament has been like a huge motivation for me to be able to achieve that goal.
That's awesome, man. Do you know what your resting heart rate is now and what it was
Uh,
then?
so because of some other health issues, my resting heart rate is usually in the 80s to 90s. Uh, but it used to be when I was about 100 pounds heavier, like 120, 130. So,
Wow.
so
Okay.
yeah,
My wife has also a high resting
yeah.
heart rate as well. Yeah, just naturally. So it doesn't mean she can't, it doesn't impede her from doing anything physically, but yeah. Is sometimes people get confused saying that the tournament's based on style. I had an email just the other day, hey Tim, I don't know if I can come to your tournament. I'm not good enough because my my technique's not good enough. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And they were under the impression from watching some other people's videos about talking about the tournament that it was based on style rather than effective hits. I was like, any feelings on that one?
Yeah. So I find so there is some language in the rules that if took them out of context or hyper focused on them, then you could be like, look, it says right here that it's these are style points that you get. But I find this has been a difficult one for me to explain to people. So let's like kind of backtrack a bit and talk about like trying to fence to look like a plate, like a Fabrice plate.
Yeah.
If your goal is to look like a plate, so your goal is an aesthetic, right? Your goal is an aesthetic. So the goal is the aesthetic, and you train to do that. And the byproduct is a body mechanic in order to look a certain way. But I find that good body mechanics are naturally beautiful. The human body is a beautiful thing. And good body mechanics look like good fencing because good body mechanics are pretty. And because if you're good at body mechanics and you're good at fencing, you find that those plates manifest naturally without having to actively try to recreate them. I don't have to think in my head, I'm going to do plate 112 and I'm going to execute it right now. It happens because my fencing tactile brain, my fight IQ, tells me it's time to do something. And I can watch through a video and I can take stills and be like, here's this one, here's this one, here's this one, here's this one. And at no point was I actively thinking, oh, I'm going to do plate this, I'm going to do plate that, because that's not how fencing works. It's not extended rock, paper, scissors. I find that good body mechanics are necessary for good fencing, and good fencing looks visually pleasing. And visually pleasing fencing, from the perspective of a good judge, is a good litmus test on whether or not someone is completing good actions. Double hits never look good, they never do. Getting hit often does not look good either because you're getting hit, right? Now, sometimes you get lucky with bad mechanics and strike your opponent. Sometimes, you get super unlucky and your opponent is so suicidal that they, fly into your beautiful lunge and hit. But there are some things that even you could have done differently. Perhaps don't do that thing against a person. Now we're talking about fight IQ and tactics, right?
Mhm.
But the form section is more of, to me, and how I understood it was, does this person understand fencing well enough to execute actions with good body mechanics in good order to dominate or to hit their opponent in a way that is both controls the space, controls the time, and controls the blade. I find if you do all those things in good order in the right time, it is aesthetically pleasing. And that's form. That's what form is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But all those things are necessitating on, did you hit your opponent? Because doing a beautiful incortada and not striking means nothing. That means
It's
nothing.
nothing.
And doing a Posada Soto and slipping and falling in the dirt, or just not hitting your opponent, means nothing. It accomplishes nothing. Being
Yeah.
able to perform an incortada with blade control, time control, and distance control is beautiful, not just because it's aesthetically pleasing and is in good form, but because it was good fencing, and good fencing is pretty, and that's what form means.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that the people who had pushback against that either don't understand that, don't want to understand that, or felt perhaps personally called out about caring about one aspect of the historical versus the sports side of fencing than the other.
And I honestly, anyone that I hear might have those issues. I try to reach out to them and just explain to them like, hey, look, these rules, although we have an additional criteria with form tactics, where if there's a tie, might come into play, like in boxing, right? For if you can win that round. If you land more hits, effective hits, compared to your opponent, it doesn't matter, man.
Yeah.
You could be the ugliest looking fencer ever. And if I was to hit you more than you hit me, I win that round. That just is what it is. And it's
Uh,
just like, but we certainly want to try and clean up our fencing and fence to hit without being hit. So
Absolutely. I found that a lot of the pushback, especially from the form thing, came from people who either didn't do rapier or people who do rapier, but maybe don't understand it as well as they think that they do. And I think that this tournament kind of insists that you understand the weapon that you're competing in. And I find that within like the almost the individualistic, near anarchic mindset that a lot of Americans have, where they don't like being told what something is supposed to be. It's like, hey, here's what good rapier is. Here's where it is in the sources. Here's an example of it. And they're like, well, I don't want to do that. I was like, well, that's too bad, dude. Like that, like that's how it's supposed to be. But I find that I was trying to think where I was going to that. Where the disconnect really comes out from people is that this tournament very much assumes, and it is very much for rapier, because I started talking about how simple a lot of rule sets were, because it is difficult to judge a complicated rule set. And this rule set isn't necessarily all that complicated. It's just more complicated than the next thing, which is just like hilariously simple because they don't expect anything out of their judges or their competitors. And because they expect nothing, they receive nothing, and nothing has become the status quo. And so anything that kind of expects you to have even like a basic competency and to be able to pass the eye test on whether or not you're good or bad, they're like, how could you do this to us? How could you require me to be good at this weapon to be able to compete in this tournament? And they'll be like, oh, well, you're being reductive. And I was like, it is reductive. It's that simple. That's the whole point. And I'm confused by a lot of the pushback that I get on that content.
yeah, and I look at it like even in point fighting, you're judged, right? I mean, people
Yeah.
are standing around with flags and waving them in the air, and they're judging you if you were to hit, if you hit or were hit, or if there was a double, which essentially is exactly the same thing, except the clock doesn't stop and you just break and keep fighting for the period of that round. But I get it. I mean, I really do. I do. And I think also people that maybe are new at the weapon or the sport, it's a great environment to train in because you get a lot of reps in that actual 3 minutes compared to hey, three or four passes with someone who just comes out and rocks you super quick with a beat attack or something, right? I mean, you have to basically you definitely have more looks and swings at the plate against someone because of the time, the nonstop time factor. So, yeah,
Where did my camera go? There it is. Sorry.
there you go. There
Yeah,
you
no,
go.
I agree with you for absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. I think that the tournament it's not ambitious per se, but it requires the judges to be not just competent in fencing, but like competent in rapier specifically. Uh, Man, this is going to sound so pretentious, but this is kind of the difference between someone who has to eat food for a living, judging a food competition, and then like a bunch of chefs getting together and having a food competition with more chefs. You know, someone when you know that you're going to have lay judges, like I competed in public forum in high school and public forum debate, and the difference between it and cross examination is that public forum was designed in such a way that they could literally have like some of the parent chaperones be judges, but for cross examination, it required other cross examination debaters or former cross examination debaters or other debate coaches to be the judges. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fairly judged. And I find that the concept of, hey, we're doing a rapier tournament and we need people who understand rapier really well to be judges. And I don't think a lot of tournaments are willing to do that because there's not a lot of availability. Um, Free Fencing Federation with Gazellen is really doing its best to have trained judges for a lot of different things, kind of a
It's tough, man.
overarching what it means to be a judge. But tournament defense really like demands that the judges be not just familiar with the rule set, but familiar with the weapon and how the weapon is supposed to operate in order to make determinations of not just did they hit them, but was that a good action? Did they get lucky? Did they do that on purpose? Do they have a tendency of exposing this part of their body? Do they have a tendency of being suicidal? All of these things that make up what does it mean to be good at rapier it is required that the judge be good at that. And I think that a lot of people are afraid that that's too ambitious, but I don't think that it is.
I don't think it is. And honestly, we have now certified some people that have never fenced before. Just like in modern fencing, where I mean, when I competed in modern fencing, there were many judges at like the Division 1 level who had never picked up a saber in their life. They just loved fencing, watching it, and then they felt because a friend or something was competing, they fell into judging, and it's almost a calling, right? It's like a different calling. And we've actually certified a couple people where their spouse or partner was fencing and they got dragged to practice too many times, and I was like, hey, I need you to help me judge. And and then they joined the seminar, and I'll tell you what, some of those people can call the action far better than some fencers. I mean, because they put the time in, and I totally appreciate that. And I think over time, as we continue to mature this community, there will just be more people that see the judging aspect of things as a calling. Like, hey, I really enjoy, some people really enjoy judging, refereeing, administrating tournaments even. And we have to have all of it compared to all of us just can't be fencers because you can't have an NBA game without the ref, right? I mean, it just is
100%. Yeah.
is what it is. So, that's that. So to switch gears again for you, the community's it's maturing, it seems. It seems that people are becoming more dynamic in their practice, which is awesome to see, training more, studying sources more, getting into the physical fitness of things more, the gear as we touched upon more. With that, we have spirited competition. I have seen though, no, what are your feelings? Any feelings on people going post a tournament and going to their slow-mo and slowing things down to try to justify a win or create an alternative narrative, i.e., reality, compared to what might have taken place on that day, for whatever their motivation is?
You know, the immediate reaction is cope, right? I find that to make an All-American reference, when there's a football game that's tied and the kicker goes to make that final field goal and he misses, everyone's like, "How could you do this to us?" But no one cares about the 55 drop passes and the sacks and the other failures that the rest of the team made throughout the entire game. Everyone only cares about that final thing, right? And when I first started competing, I remember thinking like, man, had that judge not missed my call, I would have beaten that guy. Or, had this not happened with the judging and this, that, or, had this call gone a little bit differently, I would have won that match. And then I began to realize is like, well, even if the judge makes a bad call, these 17 other mistakes that I made also could have avoided this situation because that one bad call, if your whole tournament is based on one bad call or even two or maybe even three bad calls, then I understand that you can just be having a really, really awful day. And I've competed in a tournament where the judge literally got every call incorrect. And I talked to the organizer, and the organizer apologized to me and everything because he saw the footage, he saw it happen in real time. And I got lucky and everyone broke to elims and it was fine anyway. But and that does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to people, but to be so petty to take your footage online and slow it down and be like, here's what actually happened, as if anyone's going to watch or care. I find that to be really self-important because you're thinking, you know what, my fans, all 10 of them, are going to watch this video and be vindicated. I was like, dude, no one cares. No one cares. No one cares. You win and you lose. I find that because HEMA is populated by a lot of people who not only haven't done anything else, but haven't competed in anything else, don't really understand like volume competition. And there's a point when you're looking at like Olympic fencing per se, and you go to this Div 1 tournament, and now here we are in the final 32, and it's like any one of these people could take this gold medal. Any one of these people. And if anybody loses, we're past the point of upset. Like that's just how it's going to be. But in HEMA, there's this like, if I don't win 100% of the time, then I'm a loser. And that's just not how things are. Or like sometimes the judging doesn't go your way. Sometimes you're having a bad day. And I find that the inability to cope with that in a healthy way and then post it online and slow it down and to feel some sort of vindication only outs yourself as being an amateur to general competition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well said. And one thing I can tell you just to get a little personal is, I met you 4 years ago, I think,
Yeah, about four
and
years ago.
I've seen your maturity in competition come a long way. From when I first, because I've probably judged you 30 times, maybe
Yeah.
easily 30 bouts. And I've seen just even the way you approach your bout to become more mature. And obviously, I've seen your results improve a lot too because of that.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and then to go back to that Division 1 thing, and I was one of those competitors who did compete at that level. And the one thing I can tell you is the same person doesn't win every tournament.
No, no, and it would be
No,
weird if they did.
it would be really weird because there's so many people. Once you get into the top 65 of the country, there's probably a good 20 people that have the ability to take home that national championship medal at any given moment. And that person, the person who's like ranked number one in the US, might win that knack at the Div 1 level maybe once a season if they're lucky. If you take Aaron Zilagi at the Hungarian saber fencer who won the gold medal at the Olympics 3 times in a row, up until I think even now, he's never won a world championship. So that, you know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
over. It's just it's a miracle if you were to repeat, right? And so I think it'll be time. I think and I think as we mature as a community, we will see people be able to understand like, hey, losing, it's a process, and you learn a lot from losing. And not saying, hey, we all want to win, right? We'd all want to get the W, but sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Oh,
So
absolutely. There's
yeah,
a lot there's a lot of things in the community I find that really out people who haven't been a part of any other competitive thing. One of those things is celebration. Now, I'm not here to advocate that you should like fist pump and run laps every time you win, but I find that the pushback against celebration uh more instead of being like on this like moral standpoint of hey we don't want people to be like arrogant and big-headed and it's rude to celebrate, but a lot of the pushback comes from this place of I'm uncomfortable with noise in public and I don't know how to react to it because fencing tournaments are like weirdly quiet all the time. Because think of any other sport on the planet, and it is not quiet. No sport is quiet. There's cheering, there's happiness, there's joy, and fencing is like if you make sounds, then you're disrespectful,
yeah,
and that only happens in an event where most people have just never been in a competitive environment. And I'm not trying to say that being in a competitive environment and absolves you of being rude because even football, which is known for excessive celebration, has rules against excessive celebration, but they have those rules to like you kind of like keep it at a certain level. And
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with being like a little excited that you did well or being kind of upset that you didn't do all that well. But this idea that no emotions, don't display any emotions until you go sit down somewhere else or in private is very amateurish to me, and I find that it makes other people from other sports not take us seriously.
yeah,
And that's just one aspect of that because you look at ESPN, there's cornhole and handball that have time slots on ESPN. Why? Those sports are so lame and silly, but they take themselves seriously and they're standardized. And so they get a spot. They get a spot online. And I understand I don't want HEMA to become so mainstream that everyone and their mom's doing it. But at the same time, there's like a level of I take this seriously. And a lot of people are like, oh no, we're just silly guys with swords. And I find that that's just their excuse to not train and not be good. Because if we're just a bunch of silly guys with swords, then being bad at this doesn't matter. But it diminishes all the work and effort and time that I've put in because they want to diminish what I've done to feel better about themselves, is really what it comes down to.
yeah.
And I find that to be very offensive because I put a lot of time into this.
No, there's a lot of research that's been done into that mentality. If and it's not even celebrating, if you will. It has to do sometimes the emotion might come from that stress during the bout, right? That push and pull during the bout. And it's almost like tennis when you hit the shot and you exhale, it's the stress release. And so you might make a noise like, yeah, we see it in martial arts, kia, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. And it's not, it's just relaxing your body after a somewhat stressing moment. Not saying that we need to go run around the gymnasium, throw our mask. Heck no. But at
No.
the same time, giving yourself a fist pump and going, yeah, is not being disrespectful to your opponent, in my humble opinion. And I've seen many other sports where it's not. And I've seen that as well, how some people do take offense to it. I know at our tournament, if you were to go, hey, like heck yeah, or you're stoked, have fun, dude. Just don't insult your opponent, right? And and that's fine. Personally, as a fencer, I've noticed through my competitive career, at first I used to yell a lot, and I noticed that wasn't good for me. I noticed that I conserved more energy, not yelling, and also I internalized my energy. I had a high engine already, and so if I took the energy and never yelled and just internalized it, that I actually fenced even better, and I was far more focused. And I kept a journal for years on these situations to document it. And I realized at the end of my competitive career that the last 2 years of it, my results were far better than 2 years before, where I decided, hey, look, I'm going to scale back on this and internalize everything. It was strong. But everyone's different. Every personality is different. Some people, I call them, they sleep when they fence, right?
Yeah.
They sleep in the distance. They get hit a lot. But if you can get them to be a little more motivated, sometimes the yelling for them wakes them up and they fence with more energy. And that's a good thing for them. And eventually maybe they'll stop yelling at some point, but a little yell for someone like that to get their engine going is not a bad thing. And I think we as a community we have to look at that rather than just cut someone down because their personality is different than you or the way they fence is different than you. Then, again, we're supposed to be a welcoming community rather than excluding. So, you know,
Yeah, and it's an immediate knee-jerk reaction, but I hear someone like, "Hey, did you see that guy? He yelled when he threw that cut, or he kind of turned around and he fist bumped. What a jerk!" And all I heard was, "I've never pushed myself to my absolute limit in order to win something." And it was what I heard when you said this person just like was unable to control their emotions in this moment. And I was like, "Oh man, like I get what you're trying to say, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's true." But again, I think it just comes from this is an amateur sport full of amateurs, full of people who've never done anything else. And taking objective advice from people with no experience in the general concept of competition is foolish. I think it's foolish.
yeah.
Um,
And
because
I
like I
think
said,
it'll
we see
change.
all around us every other sport doesn't act this way.
Yeah, I was watching Combat Con over the weekend. I saw some people show some energy at some parts during the tournament. It kind of got me stoked. I was like, oh, this is awesome to see a rapier fencer give me a fist bump after they land a killer touch.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is great. I want to see a little bit of that, right? I mean, because I'm also a spectator, not just a practitioner. Let me ask you this, man, to wrap up here. And number one, just thank you so much, dude, for setting aside time. I really appreciate
No,
it.
absolutely.
And but if you had to give insight, I ask this to everyone, is if you had to give insight to someone who is year one in their journey, under year one in their journey in historical fencing, what would that one piece of advice be?
Be honest with yourself about your physical limitations and abilities. It's easy to watch, man. It's easy to go on YouTube and type in David Pascal beats everyone on the earth, and watch him like lunge 20 feet away and fold in half and do jumps and rolls and all sorts of other crazy stuff and be like, I want to do that. And then you go do it and you just blow your knees or you can't. And you find out, oh, I physically can't do that. And you get super discouraged and quit or do something else or quit the weapon you're doing and do something else. Or, the only loner rapier in your school is this like 6 pound, 25-year-old dark wood that some SCA guy donated to you. And you hold that and you're like, I hate this. I hate rapier. And you put it down, never touch another one again. I think it's really important that people are honest with themselves about the expectations they have for the sport that they're in and their physical limitations. Like, I started the sport when I was, severely obese and overweight. And it's not that I couldn't lunge, but I couldn't lunge very far and I couldn't hinge my hips very far because my giant belly would get in the way and it would hit my leg. That doesn't mean that I couldn't fence. That didn't mean I couldn't land touches, but I had to be like, hey, I can't set up hits from Largissimo like David Pascal can. I have to instead figure out a way to work my way in. And so in doing so, I used a shorter sword. I became good at parries. I became good at parry riposte, and parry riposte turns into single time. And I lost a ton of weight. And now I have that time and I have that space and that physical ability to do both if necessary, because I was honest with myself at the beginning. And I think that a lot of people get discouraged, or they think, hey, this is not for me. And one of my number one, is this guy a fraud or a charlatan, when I see him teaching, is when he has a very specific style that requires a specific stance and a specific distance and a specific way to hold the sword and a specific way to hold your offhand. And you do this exactly the way I'm doing it, or you're not doing what I'm doing correctly. And it becomes not just conceptual, but dogmatic. And I find that people who teach that way are both not honest with themselves about their own physical abilities, and they're not being honest with their students. Because if you're 6'4" and you have a heavy sword and you have a quick hand and you have good mechanics, then yeah, you can fight and this low guard from absence as much as you want. But then when you get a student who's 5'2" and overweight, and you're like, you're not very good at rapier. Are they not good at rapier? Or are they not good at what you're doing? And I think that's very important. And I think if more people understood fencing from a conceptual standpoint of, okay, he takes the sword and he thrusts in this guard, we can do that in a myriad of ways. And we can take specific plates from the manuals and be like, all right, well, you can't bend in this way because of, maybe you have some sort of physical limitation or disability. Let's do this instead. And conceptually, it will be the same. And I think that if that old master was here to see you do that, he would approve, knowing what your physical limitations are. And he wouldn't say, you're not doing rapier the way I want you to. He wouldn't say that. And I think that if you're honest with yourself at the beginning, then you'll find more success with any kind of fencing that you want to do.
Spot on, man. Appreciate it. Good insights, y'all. So anyone starting out under year one, man, that's some gold insight right there. The long art is the long art, and it takes a while to learn and pick up, and just don't get discouraged. So, well, thank you, Charles, man. Appreciate you very much for coming on and just giving us some of your thoughts, and certainly catch up with you soon, buddy. All right.
Thanks, man.
Wrap. Take care, everyone. Bye.